Welcome to Science or Fiction, a podcast by sci-fi author Michael J Scharen. In this program, we'll be discussing science, fiction, and the often blurred spaces between the two. Here we try to dispel common scientific misconceptions by both Hollywood and the media, even that which is meant to be educational. My background includes a Bachelor of Science and Master of Arts in Physics, with experience in both R&D and production. I hope you enjoy these podcasts, and if there are comments or input, please direct them via the contact page for my website, michaelsbookcorner.com. How much should we believe when it comes to history? Napoleon had it right on so many levels when he said, "History is but a lie agreed upon." I'll admit I have been accused more than once of donning a tinfoil hat, but look at how many conspiracies turned out to be real. Napoleon, like other so-called great men, was in a position to know whereof he spoke. Like MacArthur, Teddy Roosevelt, Adolf Hitler, Stalin, and scores of others, he traveled with an entourage of friendly artists, reporters, and cult followers. Such figures glide through life in a fog of self-promotion and propaganda, touting their wondrous deeds or theories. It was none other than Winston Churchill who said, "History will be kind to me because I shall be writing it." By and large, he was correct. Such people, along with their promoters, recite the approved worshipping mantras so frequently that they begin to believe it themselves. What we call the big lie is none other than the logical fallacy with the apt name of ad nauseum. This hagiography, practiced consciously or unconsciously by the media and what passes for academia, quickly becomes a constant bludgeon assaulting the sensibilities and common sense of all who are subject to it. The ancillary effect is the silencing or self-censorship of those offering contradictory facts or analysis. These become the heretics, the outcasts. Cancel culture is not something new. It is as old as mankind. The result is that those with the loudest voices are propped up by armies of true believers who have not exercised their critical thinking skills. Perception then becomes reality, with the politicians, paid media, corporations, and others touting the party line, carrying the day. Many such people absolutely know that what they are preaching is utterly false, yet persist in the hope of achieving some hidden agenda. Just as often, the only consideration, understandably, is putting food on the table. But to the zealots, the end justifies the means. And usually the virtue-signaling automatons are the people society reveres most. That is, until the fad changes and we're just supposed to move on. How many know that Theodore Roosevelt was one of the chief cheerleaders for the Spanish-American War, or that the Maine, in all probability, blew up without any help? Teddy's bacon was saved by black troops at San Juan Hill after he lost a third of his own 500-man complement. This he admitted in his own book called The Rough Riders. At the time, he briefed his gaggle of friendly reporters on the scene who knew better, making sure that he was the hero. Roosevelt then presided over the butchery of the Philippine people who just wanted to be left without foreign overlords. Next, their protector, MacArthur, utterly botched the defense of the Philippines in the face of the Japanese invasion. But he was made a hero and promoted anyway. He made sure he was portrayed later as the savior of the islands. It seems not to matter that so many documented facts exist to counter the popular narratives. Randolph Hearst is long gone, but his brand of yellow journalism is only accelerated. No doubt it existed as long as humans have had language, written or otherwise. Ramses II, though fighting to a lucky draw, put up billboards back home telling of his great victory over the Hittites. Perhaps Teddy Roosevelt learned from him. This is why I don't need to invent conspiracies. All one needs to do to be singled out by the cult is point to the many inconsistencies and contradictions in any popular narrative and start asking innocent questions. This is real science, by the way, of the Socratic method. Nonetheless, human waves will come at you, calling for your destruction. In getting to the truth, we ask questions and look for facts or evidence that support claim X, Y, or Z. Responses such as trust the science, or trust doctors so-and-so, or the consensus is blah blah blah, are not evidence but logical fallacies. Hearsay is not a valid argument, and neither are shaky historical texts from a single source decades or centuries after the fact. Though the courts are incredibly corrupt, the basic rules there are sound. It is not logical and not allowed to argue without evidence. The fact that government prosecutors do it consistently and get away with it is a topic for a future podcast. All of the above must be considered for my basic thesis and are pertinent to that question. Of our long-taught history, how much of it is either made up or conspicuously ignored? This was a running theme in my book, For the Ages. I was inspired by works such as Caesar the Messiah by Joseph Atwill, as well as the work of Graham Hancock in bringing the subject of mankind's lost ancient history to the fore. Government-approved schools love to disseminate what passes for knowledge in neat self-contained packets, such as names of kings, presidents, and generals, the dates of wars and treaties, etc. It should be obvious to anyone following a war nowadays that the start and end dates are not so clear, nor are they neatly separated from the preceding development of hostilities. Why is the past presented differently? This will only deteriorate further in the face of what a friend calls our scrolling culture. Scroll on, and what we saw 15 seconds ago is a distant memory. What is kept hidden today, as well as on our long sojourn here as alpha predators, are the true nature and causes for conflict. It has been said that all wars are bankers' wars, which is not far from the truth. Where the bankers end and the crony corporations begin is blurred by design. President McKinley was a puppet of the bankers, and so is Wilson, who promised to stay out of World War I. J.P. Morgan and friends had to make sure that Britain and France continued paying on their loans, so Wilson killed all warnings by the German government in American newspapers. Those who believed their government was there to protect them went ahead to book voyages on the Lusitania or others sailing in British waters. Lincoln was a slick corporate lawyer, fighting to make sure his employers had maximum protection from competition, foreign or domestic. Certainly, an entire market held captive by 50% tariffs could not be allowed to secede. They might start buying cheaper and or better goods from Great Britain. At least in the old days, people knew war was about plunder and raw power. Soldiers expected to be paid in gold, slaves, land, or women, or a suitable combination. World War I was a fight between 4 imperial empires to maintain all those closed markets, 5 after the U.S. took over Spanish possessions. It was a fight over stolen natural resources, forced markets, and cheap labor. World War II was about the same, exacerbated by incredibly harsh treatment of Germany in the Treaty of Versailles. Then Japan had the gall to attempt in China what the British and French had done for hundreds of years. Graham Hancock I had once thought to be on the fringe, but much of what he discusses is gaining true scientific traction. We need to listen to the fringe more often. It is curious that much of the work on the most interesting archaeological sites encounters so much resistance. Exploration of digs pointing to alternative and mysterious high-tech civilizations preceding ours is impeded by governments. This is notable but not surprising. Government demands total dependence after all. Governments claim to have all the answers, and these overlords now provide most of the research money. The same could apply to past eras where scholars relied on wealthy, connected patrons, but at least there was competition. One might argue that a more liberal exchange of ideas existed in the 18th and 19th centuries than it does now in many areas. Did an advanced civilization exist in distant antiquity? Almost certainly it did. Architecture, building, and manufacturing methods superior to our own, are quite evident. Try as we might, we could not duplicate polygonal masonry with stones weighing scores of tons. We cannot cut and shape the hardest stone with the speed and precision done 12 or more millennia in the past. Why is this so frightening to the powers that be in governments or academia to admit? They would have to own up to their own ignorance and ineptitude. They would have to admit they are fallible. That would signal a crumbling of their power, which is by and large only a psychological hold over those they steal from on an hourly basis. Once cracks begin to appear in that wall of lies, it is amazing how fast it can be toppled. Even worse, they would have to admit their absurd narratives were sown to protect the powerful. Files from JFK's assassination were to be revealed 50 years after the fact, yet for many this did not happen. Likely there are few who even know what files, in this instance or many others, to look for or where they are. That is, if they have not been destroyed already. Few people, including the die-hard fans, really understood The Matrix. I'll admit that I did not either, since we were all caught up in the special effects. The Matrix is really a modern revision of Plato's parable of the cave. I'll leave it to the listeners to check that one out. The point is that all of us are living in the Matrix, and nearly always have. The technology changes the look and feel of it over the eons, but it is really timeless. The Matrix is a system of arbitrary and capricious social controls placed upon you by those who only wish to rule over you, tax you directly or through planned economic downturns, market unnecessary or dangerous products, control your movements, thoughts, or how you raise your children. As in the movies, some find out about it and are aware, some never wake up, and some actually prefer the systems at hand rather than the uncertainty of freedom. History propagated by governments, academia, mass media, and the like comprise key structures of the Matrix. You are a commodity to be exploited, or the bodies of your loved ones to serve as cannon fodder when the latest lies stop working. The arbitrary and violent hierarchies we live under cannot be maintained entirely through force. The propaganda provided by our warped history is there to gaslight the public, making them believe these structures are legitimate. Though monarchies have largely been replaced or reduced in stature, along with their partners in crime, the clergy, there are still people walking around who believe the so-called leaders have been chosen by divine providence. Our false histories serve to maintain governments and the ridiculous people in them. There's never been a satisfactory explanation for why one Christian king chosen by God was at war with another Christian king chosen by God. There's no way of explaining how someone you've never met and never voted for is now representing you. Every now and then there are slip-ups, changes of conscience, or information once thought disappeared will reappear. We must continue to collect this data, sparse as it may be. It is enough, however, to keep the Socratic method alive. As long as questions may be asked or contradictions may be pointed out, those nuggets we squirrel away will be valuable. Always look for the history behind the history. What are the motivating factors? As with Watergate, follow the money is an excellent place to start. I hope you've enjoyed this program, written and presented by author Michael J Scharen, in conjunction with my mini science fiction novels. Please visit the website, michaelsbookcorner.com, to see what is on offer. A new episode of Science or Fiction will be brought to you each week. Thank you for listening.